Hello my loves, and welcome back to another video. We are back to a reading video today. It's been a little while since we've done one. I was trying to decide what I wanted to read next, and I have decided I think it is time for us to start a longer book to read together. Not very long, still a novella ostensibly, but Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla. I have been meaning to read this for a while. I have read it a long time ago, but I got this edition that I've been really looking forward to reading. This is Carmen Maria Machado's version, a re-edit of the original. I am super excited for this because I've read some of Machado's other work and really enjoyed it. So I am excited to see this kind of perspective on the book. So we will be reading, it's all the original text. There's nothing extra. There is a foreword and some new illustrations in this edition, which I can't show you because copyright. But the original text, of course, is public domain, so I can read all of that for you, no problem, as we go through this book together. If you end up enjoying, I highly recommend picking up a copy of this for yourself so you can see all the illustrations and all that good stuff. But we're going to read the first chapter together today. So without further ado, let us start to crack this open. This is going to be a soft-spoken reading video. If that sounds like your cup of tea, I hope you will read along with us. If not, I will catch you in another video. But let us go ahead and get started. Carmilla was first published in The Dark Blue in 1871. Let's go through, got the introduction, and then we reach the prologue. Upon a paper attached to the following narrative, Dr. Hesselius has written a rather elaborate note, which he accompanies with a reference to his essay on the strange subject which the manuscript illuminates. This mysterious subject he treats in his essay with his usual learning and acumen, but with remarkable directness and abridgment. It will form but one volume of the series of that extraordinary man's collected papers. As I publish the case in these volumes, simply and for the interest of the laity, I shall not prologue the narrator. And, after due consideration, I have also determined to abstain from presenting any précis of the learned doctor's reasoning or extract from his statement on a subject which he describes as involving, not improbably, some of the profoundest arcana of our dual existence. I was anxious, upon discovering this paper, to reopen the correspondence commenced by Dr. Hesselius so many years before with a person so clever and careful as his informant seems to have been. Much to my regret, however, I found that she had died in the interval. That being said, she probably could have added little to the narrative which she communicates with such fastidious detail in the following pages. J. Sheridan Le Fanu, 1871. Chapter 1. An Early Fright. In Styria, we, though by no means magnificent people, inhabit a manor house. A small income in that part of the world goes a great way. 800 or 900 a year does wonders. Ours would have barely answered among wealthy people at home. My father is English, and I bear an English name, yet I have never seen England. But here, in this lonely and primitive place, where everything is so marvelously cheap, I really don't see how ever so much more money would at all materially add to our comforts or luxuries. My father was in the Austrian service, and retired upon a pension and his patrimony. He purchased this feudal residence, and the small estate on which it stands, at a bargain. Nothing can be more picturesque or solitary. It stands on a slight eminence in a forest. The road, very old and narrow, passes in front of its drawbridge, never raised in my time, and its moat is stocked with perch and sailed over by many swans. On its surface float white fleets of water lilies. Over all this the manor house shows its many-windowed front, its towers and its Gothic chapel. The forest opens in an irregular and very picturesque glade before its gate, and at the right, a steep Gothic bridge carries the road over a stream that winds in deep shadow through the wood. I have said that this is a very lonely place. Judge whether or not I say the truth. Looking from the hall door towards the road, the forest in which our castle stands extends in every direction. The nearest inhabited village is about 7 of your English miles to the east. The nearest inhabited manor house of any historic association, that of an old general spiel store, is nearly 20 miles away to the west. I have said the nearest inhabited village, because there is only 3 miles westward, that is to say, in the direction of General Spielsdorf's manor house, a ruined village. There sits a quaint, roofless little church, in the aisle of which are the mouldering tombs of the proud family of Karnstein. Now extinct, they once owned the desolate chateau which overlooks the silent ruins of the town from the thick of the forest. Respecting the cause of the desertion of this striking and melancholy spot, there is a legend which I shall relate to you another time. Listen and wonder. I must tell you now how very small is the party who constitute the inhabitants of our castle. I don't include servants or those dependents who occupy rooms in the buildings attached to the manor house. My father, who is the kindest man on earth, but growing old, and I, at the date of my story, only 19. 8 years have passed since then. I and my father constituted the family at the manor house. My mother, a Styrian lady, died in my infancy, but I had a good-natured governess who had been with me since then. I could not remember a time when her fat, benevolent face was not a familiar picture in my memory. She was Madame Perrodon, a native of Bern, whose care and good nature now in part supplied to me what was lost with the death of my mother. She made a 3rd at our little dinner party. There was a 4th, Mademoiselle de la Fontaine, a lady you might call a finishing governess. She spoke French and German, and Madame Perrodon French and broken English, to which my father and I added unbroken English. We did this partly for patriotism's sake, and partly to prevent it becoming a lost language between us. The consequence was a babel at which strangers used to laugh, and which I shall make no attempt to reproduce in this narrative. There were also 2 or 3 young lady friends, close to my own age, who were occasional visitors. These were our regular social resources, but of course there were chance visits from the neighbors of only 5 or 6 leagues distance. My life was, notwithstanding, rather a solitary one, I can assure you. My governesses had as much control as you might imagine they had over a rather spoiled girl whose father allowed her to have her own way in nearly everything. The first occurrence in my life which produced a terrible impression upon my mind, one which, in fact, never has been equaled, was one of the very earliest incidents I can recollect. Some people will think it so trifling that it should not be recorded here. You will see, however, by and by, why I mention it. The nursery, which I had all to myself, was a large room in the uppermost story of the manor house, with a steep oak roof. I can't have been more than 6 years old the night I awoke and, from my bed, failed to see the nursery maid. Neither was my nurse there, and I thought myself alone. I was not frightened, for I was one of those happy children who are studiously kept in ignorance of ghost stories, of fairy tales, of the lore that makes us cover up our heads when the door cracks suddenly or the flicker of a guttering candle makes the shadow of a bedpost dance upon the wall. I was vexed and insulted at finding myself, I imagined, neglected, and I began to whimper in preparation for a burst of sobs. It was only then that I saw the solemn but very pretty face looking at me from the side of the bed. The young lady was kneeling with her hands under the coverlet. I looked at her with a kind of pleased wonder and ceased whimpering. She caressed me with her hands and lay down beside me on the bed. She drew me towards her, smiling. I felt immediately soothed and fell asleep again. This was the sensation that woke me, as if 2 needles ran into my breast very deep at the same moment. I cried loudly. The lady started back, her eyes fixed on me, then slipped down upon the floor, and I thought hid herself under the bed. Frightened, I yelled with all my might. Nurse, nursery maid, housekeeper all came running in, and hearing my story made light of it, soothing me all they could meanwhile. But child as I was, I could perceive that their faces were pale with uncharacteristic expressions of anxiety, and I saw them look under the bed and about the room, peep under tables and pluck open cupboards. The housekeeper whispered to the nurse, "Lay your hand along that hollow in the bed. Someone did lie there. The place is still warm." I remember the nursery maid petting me, and all 3 examining the place where I told them I felt the puncture, and pronouncing that there was no sign visible that any such thing had happened to me. The housekeeper and the 2 other servants remained sitting up all night, and from that time a servant always sat with me in the nursery, until I was about 14. I was very nervous for a long time after this. A pale, elderly doctor was called in. How well I remember his long, saturnine face, lightly pitted with smallpox scars, and his voluminous chestnut wig. For a good while, every other day, he came in and gave me medicine, which of course I hated. The morning after I saw this apparition, I was in a state of terror, and I could not bear to be left alone, daylight though it was. I remember my father coming up and standing at the bedside, talking cheerfully and asking the nurse a number of questions. He laughed very heartily at one of the answers and patted me on the shoulder, kissing me and telling me not to be frightened. It was nothing but a dream, he said, and could not hurt me. But I was not comforted, for I knew the visit of the strange woman was not a dream, and knew instinctively that she could, in fact, hurt me. I was not consoled by the nursery maid's assuring me that it was she who had come and looked at me and lain down beside me in the bed, and that I must have been half dreaming not to have known her face. I remember, too, in the course of that day, a venerable old man in a black cassock coming into the room with the nurse and housekeeper and talking a little to them, and then very kindly to me. His face was sweet and gentle, and he told me they were going to pray. He joined my hands together and told me he desired me to say softly while they were praying, "Lord, hear all good prayers for us, for Jesus' sake." I think these were the very words, because I often repeated them to myself, and for years afterward my nurse would make me say them in my prayers. I remember so well the thoughtful, sweet face of that white-haired old man in a black cassock. I remember so well how he stood in that rude, lofty room with the clumsy furniture of a fashion 300 years old about him, and the scanty light entering through the small lattice. He knelt, and the 3 women with him, and he prayed aloud with an earnest, quavering voice for what felt like an entire age. I forget all my life preceding that event. For some time after it is all obscure also, but the scenes I have just described stand out vividly as the isolated pictures of the phantasmagoria, surrounded by darkness. Alright, since chapter 1 wasn't too long, let's also go ahead and read chapter 2, A Guest. I am now going to tell you something so strange it will require all your faith in my veracity to believe my story. It is not only true, but truth of which I have been an eye-witness. It was a sweet summer evening, and my father asked me, as he sometimes did, to take a walk with him along our manor house's beautiful forest vista. "General Spielsdorf cannot come to us as soon as I had hoped," said my father, as we ambled through the landscape. He was, presently, meant to pay us a week's-long visit, and we had expected his arrival the next day. He was to have brought with him a young lady, his niece and ward, Mademoiselle Rheinfeldt, whom I had never seen, but whom I had heard described as a very charming girl, and in whose society I had promised myself many happy days. I was unspeakably disappointed. This visit and the new acquaintance it promised had furnished my daydreams for many weeks. "And how soon does he come?" I asked. "Not until autumn, I dare say," he answered. "And I am very glad now, dear, that you never knew Mademoiselle Rheinfeldt." "Why?" I asked. "Because the poor young lady is dead," he replied. "You were not in the room when I received the General's letter this evening." I was very much shocked. General Spielsdorf had mentioned in his first letter 6 or 7 weeks before that she was not so well as he would like, but there was nothing to suggest the remotest suspicion of danger or death. "Here's the General's letter," he said, handing it to me. "I am afraid he is in great affliction. The letter appears to me to have been written in distraction." We sat down on a rough-hewn bench under a group of magnificent lime trees. The sun was setting with all its melancholy splendor behind the sylvan horizon, and the stream that flows beside our home and passes under the steep old bridge wound through many a group of noble trees and past our feet, reflecting in its current the fading crimson of the sky. General Spielsdorf's letter was so extraordinary, so vehement, and in some places so self-contradictory, that I read it twice over, the second time aloud to my father, and was still unable to account for it, except by supposing that grief had unsettled his mind. It read, "I have lost my darling daughter, for as such I loved her. During the last days of dear Bertha's illness I was not able to write to you. Before then I had no idea of the danger. I have lost her and now learn all too late. She died in the peace of virtuousness and the glorious hope of a blessed futurity. The fiend who betrayed our infatuated hospitality has done it all. I thought I was receiving into my house innocence, gaiety, a charming companion for my lost Bertha. Heavens, what a fool I have been. I thank God my child died without a suspicion of the cause of her suffering. She is gone without so much as conjecturing the nature of her illness and the accursed passion of the agent of all this misery. I devote my remaining days to tracking and extinguishing a monster. I am told I may hope to accomplish my righteous and merciful purpose. At present there is scarcely a gleam of light to guide me. I curse my conceited incredulity, my despicable affectation of superiority, my blindness, my obstinacy, all too late. I cannot write or talk collectedly now. I am distracted. As soon I have a little recovered, I mean to devote myself for a time to inquiry, which may possibly lead me as far as Vienna. Some time in the autumn, 2 months hence, or earlier, If I live, I will see you. That is, if you permit me. I will then tell you all that I scarce dare put upon paper now. Farewell. Pray for me, dear friend. In these terms ended this strange letter. Though I had never seen Bertha Rheinfeldt, my eyes filled with tears at the news of her loss. The sun had now set. I returned the General's letter to my father. It was a soft, clear evening, and we loitered in the gloaming, speculating upon the possible meanings of the violent and incoherent sentences I had just read. We had nearly a mile to walk before reaching the manor house, and by that time the moon was shining brilliantly. At the drawbridge we met Madame Perrodon and Mademoiselle de la Fontaine, who had come out without their bonnets to enjoy the exquisite moonlight. We heard their gabbling, animated dialogue as we approached. We joined them at the drawbridge and turned about to admire with them the beautiful scene. The glade through which we had just walked lay before us. At our left the narrow road wound away under clumps of lordly trees and was lost to sight amid the thickening forest. At the right, the same road crossed the steep and picturesque bridge, near which stood a ruined tower that once guarded the pass, and beyond the bridge rose an abrupt hill, covered with trees and shadows and ivy-clustered rocks. Over the grass and grounds a thin film of mist was curling like smoke, marking the distances with a transparent veil. Here and there we could see the river, faintly flashing in the moonlight. No softer, sweeter scene could be imagined. The news I had just heard made it melancholy, but still, nothing could disturb its character of profound serenity. My father and I stood looking in silence over the expanse. The two good governesses, standing a little way behind us, discoursed upon the scene, waxing eloquent about the moon. Madame Perrodon was fat, middle-aged, and romantic, and talked and sighed poetically. Mademoiselle de la Fontaine, in the tradition of her father, who was a German, assumed to be psychological, metaphysical, and something of a mystic, declared that when the moon shone with such intensity, it was well known that it indicated a particular type of spiritual activity. The effect of the full moon in such a state of brilliancy was manifold, she said. It acted on dreams, it acted on lunacy, it acted on nervous people. It had marvelous physical influences connected with life. Mademoiselle related that her cousin, who was a mate on a merchant ship, once took a nap on deck on such a night, lying on his back with his face full in the light of the moon. He woke after a dream of an old woman clawing him by the cheek, with his features horribly drawn to one side. His countenance had never quite recovered its equilibrium. The moon, this night, she says, is full of odyllic and magnetic influence. And see, when you look behind you at the front of the manor house, how all its windows flash and twinkle with that silvery splendor, as if unseen hands have lighted up the rooms to receive fairy guests. It was, I thought, a moment in which my sorrowful spirit, indisposed to talk itself, found the talk of others pleasant to its listless ears. I gazed on, pleased with the tinkle of the ladies' conversation. "I'm in one of my moping moods tonight," said my father after a silence, and then, quoting Shakespeare, "In truth, I know not why I am so sad. It wearies me. You say it wearies you, but how I got it, came by it, I forget the rest. But I feel as if some great misfortune is hanging over us. I suppose the poor General's afflicted letter has had something to do with it." The sound of carriage wheels and many hoofs upon the road arrested our attention. It seemed to be approaching from the high ground overlooking the bridge, and very soon it emerged. 2 horsemen, then a carriage drawn by 4 horses. 2 men rode behind. It was the travelling coach of a person of rank, and we were all immediately absorbed in watching that very unusual spectacle. As the carriage passed the summit of the steep bridge, one of the lead horses took fright, and then the whole team broke into a wild gallop together, dashing between the horsemen who rode in front and thundering along the road towards us with the speed of a hurricane. From the carriage window came a long and terrible scream. We advanced in curiosity and horror, my father in silence, the rest of us exclaiming our fear. The suspense did not last long. Just before the castle drawbridge there stood by the roadside a magnificent lime tree and an ancient stone cross, at sight of which the horses, now going at a pace that was perfectly frightful, swerved. The wheel buckled over the projecting roots of the tree. I knew what was coming. I covered my eyes and turned my head away. My governesses cried out. I opened them again to see a scene of utter confusion. 2 of the horses lay sprawled on the ground. The carriage lay upon its side with 2 wheels spinning in the air. The men were busy removing the traces, and a lady with a commanding air and figure climbed out. She stood with clasped hands, raising a handkerchief to her eyes. Through the carriage door was now lifted a young lady, who appeared to be lifeless. My dear old father was already beside the elder lady with his hat in his hand, tendering his aid and the resources of his manor house. The lady did not appear to hear him or to have eyes for anything but the slender girl being placed against the slope of the bank. I approached. The young lady was apparently stunned, but she was certainly not dead. My father, who fancied himself something of a physician, placed his fingers on her wrist. He assured the lady, who declared herself the girl's mother, that her pulse, though faint and irregular, was still perceptible. There was something in this lady's air and appearance so distinguished and imposing, and in her manner so engaging, one could not help the conviction that she was a person of consequence. She was a fine-looking woman for her time of life, and must have once been handsome. She was tall and pale, but not thin, dressed in black velvet, and with a proud and commanding countenance, though now agitated strangely. She clasped her hands and looked upward, as if in a momentary transport of celestial gratitude, but immediately returned with a theatrical monologue. "Was ever a being so born to calamity?" she cried. "Here I am on a journey of life and death, in which to lose an hour is to lose all. My child would not have recovered sufficiently to resume her route, for who can say how long? I must leave her. I cannot, dare not delay. For how far on, sir, can you tell is the nearest village? I must leave her there, and shall not see my darling, or even hear of her, till my return 3 months hence." I plucked my father by the coat and whispered earnestly in his ear, "Oh, papa, pray ask her to let her stay with us. It would be so delightful, do pray." "If Madame will entrust her child to the care of my daughter and of her good governess, Madame Perrodon, and permit her to remain as our guest under my charge until her return, it will confer a distinction and an obligation upon us, and we shall treat her with all the care and devotion which so sacred a trust deserves." "I cannot do that, sir. It would be to task your kindness and chivalry too cruelly," said the lady, distractedly. "It would, on the contrary, confer unto us a very great kindness at the moment when we most need it. My daughter has just been disappointed by a cruel misfortune in a visit from which she had long anticipated a great deal of happiness. If you confide this young lady to our care, it will be her best consolation. The nearest village on your route is distant and affords no such inn at which you could think of placing your daughter, and you cannot allow her to continue her journey for any considerable distance without danger. If, as you say, you are unable to suspend your journey, you must part with her tonight. Nowhere could you do so with more honest assurances of care and tenderness than here." By this time, the carriage was back in its upright position, and the horses, quite tractable, in their traces again. The lady threw on her daughter a glance which was not quite so affectionate as one might have anticipated. She beckoned slightly to my father, and withdrew 2 or 3 steps with him out of hearing. There she talked to him with a fixed and stern countenance, not at all like that with which she had hitherto spoken. I was filled with wonder that my father did not seem to perceive the change, and also unspeakably curious to learn what it could be that she was speaking in his ear with so much earnestness and rapidity. For 2 or 3 minutes she remained thus employed, then turned and walked to where her daughter lay, supported by Madame Perrodon. She knelt beside her for a moment, and whispered, it seemed, a little benediction in her ear. Then hastily kissing her, she stepped into her carriage. The door was closed, the footmen in stately liveries jumped up behind, the outriders spurred on, the postilions cracked their whips, the horses broke into a furious canter that threatened to become a gallop, and the carriage whirled away, followed at the same rapid pace by the 2 horsemen in the rear. And that is where we finish chapter 2, and where we will finish our reading for today. Wonderful. I love starting a new book, starting a new story. I'm very excited to see how this one continues. I will continue this reading, and we will read the whole novel over the course of the next few weeks. So if that is something you would like to hear the rest of, finish the story with me, make sure to drop a follow so you can catch the next video. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching. I hope you very much enjoyed these first couple of chapters. I'm very curious for everybody watching if this is your first time reading Carmilla, or if this is a story you've read before. Let me know down in the comments. And thank you so much for reading along with me. I hope that you are relaxed and cozy, and I hope that I will see you in the next video. But for now,